Hello, it's great to be with you again this week. So we are approaching Halloween, and I thought it would be fun to tackle a topic that I know lots of sewists find scary, and that is buttonholes. Now, the thought of buttonholes often sends shivers down many a sewist's spine, but when you couple that with doing them on knit or stretch fabrics, then it can feel like the stuff of nightmares. But fear them no more, because I'm joined this week by the wonderful Melanie Keane. On a recent sewing project, she decided to tackle this tricky technique and master it once and for all. And she was so excited about what she learned and the results that she got that she wanted to share her tips with you. So if you'd like one less thing to be afraid of this Halloween, then stay tuned. Hello everyone, and welcome to the So Mindful podcast, where we dig into the tips and topics that will help you have great fun making clothes that make you feel fabulous. I'm your host, Jackie Blakemore of So Much More Fun, and I can't wait to share this week's illuminating episode with you. So let's roll the tape. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the So Mindful podcast. I am super delighted because I'm chatting with my sewing BFF, Melanie Keane, and she's here today. And we're going to talk about one of the things that I know is a challenge for lots of people. And I think it's one of those that's a little bit scary. So as it's just been Halloween, I thought it's a good topic to slot into the agenda. And that is sewing buttonholes in knit fabrics. But before we get into that, I'll just get Mel to introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about herself. So Mel, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit more about who you are and how you got into sewing?
Hello, everybody. Yes, my name is Mel, and I'm a keen home sewer. And I started dressmaking during the pandemic when I started sewing scrubs. So I got the bug then. So now I like to make most of my own clothes for my husband sometimes. But for the last year, I've been running a refugee sewing project over in Surrey, where we have a group once a week and we get together and help them to feel happy by making their own clothes and mending things and just generally having a happy sewing time.
Yeah. And it's a great project, and it's such a lovely group. So we might as well just do a quick plug for that as well. So if you have got stuff you want to donate, are you still taking donations, Mel?
Yes, I am. And as the seasons have changed now, we've moved from the cotton tunics and they're all asking me for fabrics for winter trousers and tops and sweaters. So yeah, if you do have any dark fabrics lying around that you've grown tired of, that would be great. If you'd like to donate them, we'd be very, very grateful.
Well, I'll put details about how to get in touch with you in the show notes so people can do that. And we recently had a chat about the knitting and stitching show. So before we get into the topic for today, do you want to just give people a little update as to how that went and how you enjoyed being on the stands?
It was really exciting. I was a bit nervous about going up to London with all the train strikes, but everything worked out really well. And it was really good. If you didn't get a chance to go this year, I would highly recommend it because there were 2 halls full of sewing, knitting, crafting stands, and it was just amazing. The atmosphere there was just exciting, and you could feel free to just start conversations with people. And there were so many products on offer. You could get everything you wanted there, really.
Yeah.
Contrary to popular belief, I didn't spend lots of money because I had 3 days there, so I could look at things and then go home and decide. And so I made only a couple of select purchases.
Considered investments.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed being on the stall. I was on Dovetailed for 2 days, and I absolutely loved that because her fabrics are so vibrant and colourful, and I wore one of her patterns in one of her fabrics, and I had so many comments on my dress. Yeah, even on the train on the way home, someone said, she was talking to her friend and she said, "Oh, look at that dress, it's lovely." And her friend said, "Oh, you could wear that." And she said, no, I'm not confident enough. And I thought, you can wear it. But it's lovely. And then I was with Flying Bobbins, and we were very busy there with all the kits, and it was just exciting.
Yeah, and you sent me a photo of your dress. It looked lovely. So it's okay, I'll share that with people because it was just beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yes, I struck up some great conversations with people and just encouraging people, giving them confidence to try bright colours or techniques they haven't tried before. And on the one day that I wasn't there, I was at home thinking, I wish I was there. So it was good. It was good.
I'm so glad you enjoyed the event. I saw some of the photos. It looked amazing. So yeah, I'll definitely be putting that in my diary for next time.
Even the girl serving coffee, actually, she asked me what I was doing, and I told her about that. And she said, oh, I must come over and find you. And she did. And we had a great conversation.
Fantastic. So today we're going to talk a little bit about sewing the dreaded buttonholes, aren't we? And we got into a conversation around some of the challenges about sewing buttonholes, and particularly on a project that you were working on. So could you just share a little bit with the listeners about which project it was, and then we'll get into some of the challenges?
Well, I'm actually wearing my project. It's the Marlowe cardigan, and it's been on my list for a couple of years. And I've had various fabrics, and I've been umming and ahhing. And if I'm honest, it was trying to choose the fabric, which was the second hardest thing. But the first hardest thing was thinking about, I've got that beautiful fabric, a fantastic pattern, but oh my word, it's got buttonholes. So yeah, it's a project that it's been on my mind for a while.
Yeah, and I think the Marlowe cardigan is such a lovely, versatile pattern. It's on my list as well. So I'll be definitely following these tips when I go to make mine. It's just really on trend at the moment as well, isn't it? I think just an easy wear.
Yes, yeah. I made a cropped version this time, but I'm going to make the longer one. Now I know that I can do buttonholes because the longer pattern has 4 buttonholes. But you can really switch it up because you can make it in a drapey fabric, or you can make it in something quite thick and it can be snuggly.
And what's that fabric that you've got on today?
Well, this is a sweatshirt, fleece back sweatshirt, and I've used a rib knit for the collars and cuffs, all in the same colour. Next time I'm going to go for a really thick fabric. It's black and white with chevron design on it. So that's going to be quite different.
Yeah, quite striking. Very nice. So let's just chat a little bit about some of the challenges just with buttonholes in general. So irrespective of knit fabrics, but what kind of things do people struggle with buttonholes, do you think?
Well, positioning buttonholes, because no matter how straight you think you've done them, just one deviation or a couple of stitches can really knock the whole thing out. So you really have to think about positioning of the buttonholes, and also don't just go along with what the pattern says about where to place them. You need to put them where you want them. You don't want maybe not too high up, or you don't want one just where your boobs are that could fling open or something. You need to position them properly. And the machine, the one-stop buttonhole thing, can work so differently on different fabrics.
Yes.
We need to keep it still all the time, but viscose is quite slippy, and obviously jersey knit, that's always a challenge. And the other thing which threw me once was putting buttonholes on something that already had a breast pocket.
Okay.
So your buttonhole foot hits that and stops.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So if I was doing that again, I would do the buttonhole first and then put the pocket on.
Right. Because it kind of catches on the raised up fabric once you've got the buttonhole foot down. Yeah.
Yeah. And even the lower pockets on pajamas and things like that. But yeah, it's always a challenge.
Yeah. And I think one of the things when I was first sewing buttonholes, so I had an old fashioned machine, an old Toyota when I started sewing, which was one of the 4-step buttonholers. So you do
Oh,
the tack bit first, and then you go up one side, and then you do the tack, and then you come down the other side. And it's kind of like you keep moving the dial for each section. And I think one of the challenges with that was that if you get partway through one of the sections and then it's not quite right, or you forget to stop or something like that, it's quite hard to unpick buttonholes as well, isn't it? Because there's a lot of stitches in a small
yeah.
space.
Yes. Mind you, as you said that, I had never tried one that stop starts. But then maybe that's easier because you only have to redo one part.
But yeah, it depends on how far you've got through it, I think. But yeah, it's still a bit of a nuisance. So I just wanted to explain at this point that the way buttonholes work on manual and computerized machines is slightly different. Computerized machines often have the option for what's called a one-step buttonhole. This means you choose the stitch option for your buttonhole and it will complete the whole buttonhole without you having to change the settings. You get quite a large buttonhole foot that allows you to put in one of your buttons into the back of the buttonhole foot to automatically set the size of the buttonhole for you. There's a separate lever that you pull down on the machine close to where the presser foot is. The machine then uses that lever with the buttonhole foot to tell it how far it needs to sew and when to change direction. On this type of machine, you then set your needle to the starting point of your buttonhole, usually in the centre of the buttonhole, at the end closest to you. You then keep your foot on the foot pedal until the buttonhole is completed, and the machine usually beeps to tell you it's finished. If you have a manual machine, they often have a 4-step buttonhole with different dial settings for each part of the buttonhole. They also have a white plastic rectangular shaped buttonhole foot, but it doesn't have a place for you to put your button in. So you need to manually mark the length of your buttonhole by measuring the diameter of your button and then adding on the depth of your button. I usually make quite wide markings for the top and the bottom of my buttonhole so that I can see them peeking out even when I have the buttonhole foot down. You then do each step of the buttonhole, stopping in between to change the dial. You have to stop and start in the right places for the length of the buttonhole. One of the things that prompted me to buy my first computerized machine was the ability to do better buttonholes, and it was definitely worth it. Anyway, back to Mel. So there are different types of buttonholes, aren't there, on different machines? I think you've got a machine with a single-step buttonhole on a computerized machine. Can you just tell people a little bit about how that works?
Well, first of all, you put your button in the back of the one-stop buttonhole foot, and that gives you the size of the finished buttonhole. I always mark very precisely on my garment with a pin, so I know that where the pin goes in, that's where I need to have my needle in the down position before I start. So then I pull that out just as I start, once I've put the needle in, and then put my foot on the pedal, sit there and cross my fingers and go. So the machine automatically takes it up to the top, across and backwards a few little steps, and then down, and then finishes. And then I exhale when it's done, and it looks fine.
Brilliant. So yeah, with those machines as well, I think one of the things that caught me out in the early stages of using my first one was always used to forget that there's like a thing to pull down, isn't there, that tells it when it's at the end. And I did that so many times, forget to pull that little lever down. So if you do have one of those machines, remember to look for that.
Yeah, whilst we're saying that, actually, I was talking to Jane Brogan from Janome. She's fantastic. What she doesn't know about Janome machines isn't worth knowing. And I asked her about a buttonhole foot for larger buttons.
Yeah, because we talked about it wasn't big enough, was it, for the ones you wanted to do on this project, I think you said.
Yes, that's right. Yes. But what she said to me was, when you get to as long as your buttonhole foot can do, then just flick that lever up, the one you were just talking about, and let the machine carry on. And then when it stops, if it's not big enough still, then just flick it and you can carry on.
Oh, so it almost like resets it so it carries on a little bit further. Yeah.
Saves the expense of buying another foot for your machine.
Do they do one then that's for bigger buttons?
Yes, they do, but she said it was about £70.
Oh, wow. Because with that foot as well, for people that don't have one, as you open out one end of the foot to put your button in, and it's obviously limited as to the size of button that you can have, isn't it? Yeah, well, that's a good thing to try then, isn't it, if you've got bigger buttons? So a few challenges just generally with buttonholes, but we wanted to speak specifically about working with knit fabrics because I know there was a few things that you found and some tips that you had, particularly for working with knit fabrics.
Well, first of all, I made the neckband and the cuffs in the same fabric as the main cardigan. So that's a jersey sweatshirt. And the sweatshirting fabric didn't have enough stretch. And so it looked like it was a bit pinched. So then I went for the rib knit and I made the band and the cuffs longer, but then that stretched out so much that it was too long. So third time lucky, I took that off and made it shorter and narrower, and so that was perfect. So then I went on to try the buttonholes, And I'd always been told to use interfacing for buttonholes, and then you always use a stretch interfacing on a stretch fabric. But I realised afterwards that you don't use a stretch interfacing on stretch fabrics because you don't want the buttonholes to stretch. You want them to stay in one place where you want them. So that was one of my first mistakes, to use stretch interfacing. So my tip is to use medium or soft ordinary interfacing, the iron-on kind. So just pop that in between the two layers and that will keep it stable.
Yeah, because like you say, in some places on stretch garments, we think everything has to stretch, but there are some places you don't want anything to stretch. And one of those places, as you say, is a buttonhole, because you want the buttonhole to fit the button, not to be stretchy. So yeah, I think that's quite a natural thought process to think, oh, it needs to be a stretch interfacing, when actually it's the opposite of what you want in that
Yeah.
situation, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah. And always practice your buttonholes. I would say practice them twice, because the first one gives you a bit of confidence and the second one might throw up any real problems, but a good quality thread.
Yeah.
And always make sure that you have enough thread for the bobbin, because no matter how perfect your buttonhole is, if you run out of thread on your bobbin halfway through, then it's a disaster.
Yeah, it is quite hard to come back from that.
I tried out a couple of buttonholes, but neither of them worked really well, and that's with the woven interfacing. So I went on to a website and just searched what could I do next. And I was recommended to try stitch and tear,
Yes.
which I hadn't come across before. So it's used in embroidery. So when people are doing elaborate designs and just want to keep it stable, so you just pop that on behind the project that you're doing, and then you do your buttonhole. So it's like a piece of white fabric. So I cut a piece probably twice the size of my buttonhole and attached that. It's important to tack it on to your garment you're making. You don't want that to move. So just tack that on behind and then do your buttonhole. And that was the trick, just to use that. And so after you've done your buttonhole, then you just, as it says on the packet, you just tear it away. And then any bits which are still stuck in there, then you can just wet it slightly at the back, and that makes it a bit more soluble. And then I picked it away with a pin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
super helpful, I think. Yeah, I've used stitch and tear for when I was doing a applique type projects as well. So yeah, I think it's a really great product.
Yeah, and it's not too expensive. You can buy it online quite cheaply. So I think a couple of pounds for, I don't know, 1/4 of a metre, which I think is great value.
Yeah, because you don't need a lot for your buttonholes, do you? You don't need a lot of it to get you going. And in terms of marking your buttonhole, did you wear yours first and then pin where you were going to put your buttons? Because you were saying about don't just go with the button positions given in the pattern.
Yeah, so I did look at the buttonhole positions given and I did mark those on. But then, yes, I put some pins in and tried it on. And I was quite happy with them. The top one, I moved up a little bit because it was a little bit gapey. And I thought if I wear a small top underneath. So that's the thing to be wary of, really. The bottom one and the top one, and then you need to work out your spacing in between.
Do you just mark the starting point of your buttonholes with a pin then to get them level in terms of how far they are from the edge of the fabric?
Yes, yeah, I measure right and left and then exactly where the needle's going to go down.
And just a tip with buttonholes, if you haven't sewn them before, as you put in your fabric onto the bed of the machine, usually it sews the part of the buttonhole nearest to you first, and then it moves away from you, doesn't it? Which was the opposite way to how I thought it was going to go. I thought it was going to come towards me when I first started doing them.
Yes, it does.
So as you said, do have a practice, because then at least you'll be able to see how your machine's working and what direction it's going to go in. I think that's really valuable.
Mark where the needle goes down. So for me, I use a pin. So go through that process. And if you're using a plain fabric, plain colour like this, then it's more important to get it right and make sure you use exactly the same colour thread, because otherwise any mistakes will show up. So I'm a lot more confident when I'm doing something on a patterned fabric because it's just lost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's easier to lose the detail, isn't it, in the fabric pattern?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter because you put a lovely button on and that's covered it, hasn't it?
Indeed, yes. And also, I challenge anybody to go and look in your wardrobe at anything that you've bought. And I'm pretty sure most of them won't all be perfect either. So I think we're very hard on ourselves as
Yeah.
dressmakers that, everything has to be perfect. And it isn't even in the retail world. So give yourself some leeway. So you've mentioned a type of buttonhole stitch that you used. What was that? You said you tried a couple. Which one did you
Yeah.
finish up with?
I tried my regular stitch, which is just for wovens really, and that was far too dense and the needle got stuck quite a lot. So on my machine, I'm lucky enough to have a buttonhole jersey stitch, which is an elongated rectangle with an elongated zigzag. So it's not very dense, but it does the job.
And it looks like a bit more spaced out, doesn't it, on the picture? I think I'll try and put a copy of the picture in the show notes. The other option is I think on some machines you can change the stitch length, which is what would determine how close together it is, can't you? So you could experiment with that.
Yeah, for the refugee sewing project, we do have some machines, Janome machines, very kindly donated, thank you, which are just sort of mid-range, and they all have a jersey stitch buttonhole.
Yeah, good to know. So try that for this type of project. And can you tell the listeners a bit more about how you then cut the buttonholes?
Right, yes, I've got a wonderful little tool called a sewing chisel. Yeah, so it looks like an ordinary chisel, but the blade is about 8 centimeters long. And so you can just use that on your cutting mat. You put your garment down with your buttonhole and then tap the top of the chisel and it cuts the hole perfectly. So you've got complete control over either end. Whereas previously I had to put a pin in and then tentatively use my unpicker to open the hole up. But I would definitely recommend a chisel. It gives a lovely clean finish.
Yeah, they are good, aren't they? And I think if you haven't got that, then as you said, I tended to use an unpicker before, but as you mentioned, if you put a pin in, because we both
Mm.
had instances, haven't we, where it's gone a bit too far and cut through your buttonhole, and that's the last thing that you want as well.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So if you put a pin in each end, then as you put your unpicker in, then at least it will stop it going any further.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And any other products? Did you use anything else when you were doing the buttonholes?
I did put on a bit of fray check, which just neatens up any loose ends and strengthens it really to stop it fraying. It comes in a small bottle, probably about 15 ml, and it's just a clear liquid. It looks a bit like clear nail varnish, but it's much thinner than that. And you just pop it on and that just seals the edges. You can use that on any garment you're making, not just jersey.
I think it does help as well, like you said, if you've got the interfacing on as well, doesn't it? So you've got two things then that will stop it sort of just unpicking where the stitching is or where you've cut it. I think they're both really
Yeah.
helpful to do that.
Well, there was one other thing as well I did. With the buttons, I put them slightly higher than the buttonhole because sometimes on a jersey fabric, it can pull down. So if you put the buttons just a fraction higher than you would normally, probably only 5 millimeters, that just keeps it all lined up nice and straight when you're wearing it.
Yeah. The weight of the button can just pull that to stretch it a little bit, can't it? I think that's a great tip. As we said, practice is probably the key. That's the way to get your confidence up, isn't it? Have a go with a few on just some scrap fabric or something like that. Try some of these techniques and these products and see how you get on. And if people want to find out more about you, Mel, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, I am on Instagram under my name, Melanie Keane. So you can have a look at some of the things I've been making personally, but mainly it's about the refugee centre. I post some pictures of what we've been doing, or each week I might pick out something exciting or challenging. Yeah, so if you want to find out a little bit more about that, then you can find me on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, but that's not as up to date.
Fantastic. I'll put all those details in the notes for everybody to get in touch with you. I know you're always busy, so I'm always fascinated. What's next on your list of activities? What are you getting involved with?
Sewing-wise, my son's girlfriend's with us at the moment, and I'm teaching her to sew actually. So we're going to make a padded MacBook cover. So that involves a bit of quilting, putting a zip in. So that will be quite challenging. And then for myself, I am going to make a sew girl pinafore dress, one that I can wear with boots and a polo neck or a bright shirt or something like that. So that's what I'm going to be making next. At the refugee centre, they are really keen to sew trousers, winter trousers, and we're going to make some sort of long sweater dress as well.
Oh, very nice.
A sweater or a longer version. So we're going to use the Tilly and the Buttons Billy pattern for that. And also Guthrie Garney sent us quite a lot of jersey fabrics from their recent charity event. And we're going to make the Hebden. So you can have different colour arms and bodice. Yeah, gosh, lots to sew.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you so much, Mel. It's been really helpful. I'm sure the listeners will get a lot of help from those tips. I'm definitely going to be using them when I do my Marlowe, and I'll post some photos of that once it's finished. But
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you, and good luck with all those sewing projects that you've got coming up.
Thanks, Jackie. It's been great to talk to you too. And I'm looking forward to seeing your Marlowe.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the show notes in the description area of your podcast app and click to follow or subscribe. Or head over to sewmindful.com/podcast, which is sewmindful.com, where you can also sign up for an email reminder so that you don't miss out on any juicy episodes. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, then please help others find us by leaving a review if you love this episode. And I'm always excited to find out what you got from the episode and how you plan to use the tips. And finally, if you have a question, feedback, or a topic you'd like me to investigate, then you can also email me at hello@somuchmorefun.co.uk. So until next time, stay gorgeous and have so much more fun.